How's it going, folks? Brian Cusco here at Triple B. Today, we're bringing you another one of the Herpeton Talks with Mr. Justin Julander. He's going to be talking about the Antaresia snakes, children's, Stimsons, Pygmy Pythons, all that fun stuff, spotteds. And he did a really good job. He's got some great slides, and if you pay really close attention, you'll see that most Antaresia seem to attack from the right. Watch what I'm talking about. You watch Triple B TV.
My name is Justin Julander. I'm the founder of Australian Addiction Reptiles back in 1997. I live in Smithfield, Utah, which is almost to the border of Idaho. I got my PhD in virology in 2005, so that's kind of my day job. I'm a virologist. I study human viral diseases and ways to treat or prevent them. As a kind of research professor at Utah State University, I have access to the library and lots of journals and things like that. And so it's been a really good opportunity to kind of go after my herpetological passions as well. I can look up papers and read about some of the reptiles I'm interested in, learn about them more. So I have access to all those publications, and I can get any publication for free. And so I probably shouldn't say that because now I'm going to have all these requests. Hey, can you get me this paper? But that's allowed me to kind of have access to that. And then my goal in kind of herpetoculture is to get that science over to people who may not have that access or who don't read a lot of scientific publications, and kind of put it in a digestible form. And that's resulted in the publication of a few books. As Nick mentioned, we published the book on the carpet python complex. The second book we wrote together was on the Antaresia genus, so that's in large part where this information comes from. So to get that science out to the herper. So the Antaresia complex is very widespread through Australia. So this is just a kind of a dot map, and each of these dots represent a locality where one of these pythons has been observed. They're also found up in New Guinea, a limited range up there, and these are the smallest pythons in the world. Their maximum size is just under 4 foot, or around 4 foot, so they don't get too big, and that's the exception to the rule. They're generally 2 to 3 feet long. And they're very commonly encountered throughout Australia. Anybody who's herped Australia has probably seen a member of the Antaresia complex. They've had a little bit of a tumultuous taxonomic history. I guess most things have, and are still undergoing taxonomic revision and probably still need a lot of work. The first Antaresia was the children's python, and it was described under Liasis, which is the olive and water pythons that are, I guess, similar in appearance. If you stand 50 feet away and look at them through squinted eyes, they look pretty similar. But the next one, so that one was named after the Gray's mentor, J.G. Children. It's not for its propensity to eat children or anything like that. Maculosa was the next one discovered, the spotted python. That was also included under Liasis, and that was in 1873 by Peter. So these have been known for quite a while. The third was Prothensis, the pygmy python, and that was described as a subspecies of children's python in 1932. So there was a little bit of a gap between that time, and most of these things were just kind of lumped under children's python. So any Antaresia you saw in Australia was, no, that's just a children's python, one of those catch-all terms, right? Stimson, so the genus Antaresia was proposed by Wells and Wellington in 1984. These guys were from New Zealand, and the Australians don't really like other people describing their snakes. So they kind of didn't go along with that, and a lot of them kind of kept it in Liasis for quite a while after that. So there's kind of back and forth between Antaresia and Liasis through, from mid-80s to the 90s as well. So it kind of went through a little bit of that. But so Smith described Stimsoni in 85, and then Wells and Wellington described it as Saxicola in 85. And sometimes you'll see Saxicola used as a subspecies for kind of the easternmost range of Stimson's pythons. I guess with anything, it's got its back and forth. And then Mark O'Shea found spotted pythons in southern New Guinea, so extended the range of the Antaresia complex. And Nick gave a great kind of illustration of that Sahul continent with New Guinea and Australia connected, and that land bridge between there, so it's not too surprising considering all the rest of the animals that you can find with a similar natural history. So today there's 4 recognized species, and this is kind of a cladogram showing this. Again, taxonomy, there's all sorts of different cladograms. You can kind of mix and match them any way you want. This one shows it as the most derived or the most recent species in the python complex in Australia. So there's 2 described subspecies for Stimsoni, so I'll talk about those separately. And then there's 1 putative undescribed species, and I'll tell the story about that one. So there's still a lot of questions about interrelativity, where they separate. There could be some further cryptic speciation. That's my new favorite buzzword, cryptic speciation, where you have a bunch of stuff that looks kind of similar, but then they do genetic work and they find it's like actually 4 species. And there's a little bit of that by Alan yesterday with the Depressa complex, where they found out, it's not just one big ranging, it's 4 different species, and there's probably more, in addition. So it's kind of fun to have that speciation occur. Another point, that kind of was brought up by Nick and some others throughout the meeting is, we focus on producing pretty snakes in boxes for the most part, or lizards or whatever you work with. And so a lot of times we focus on that phenotype, and sometimes I wonder what the best way to do that is, because back in the day these were all lumped under children's pythons, and so they were kind of freely interbred between each other, and so it kind of got mixed up, and you don't have maybe a pure species. There's a lot of hybridization that goes on in the goal of making pretty snakes. And I think there needs to be kind of both sides of that coin. We need to kind of preserve the species or even localities, maybe not to the extent of the gray band. Those guys are a little nuts, but kind of more along that line is to preserve for future generations in some way. Here's kind of a picture of the different species in the Antaresia complex. You got the eastern Stimson's python that kind of has the widest range across the center of Australia. The western Stimson's python here in brown, and then the Pygmy Python kind of located within. It's sympatric with the western Stimson python, so they share a lot of range. The children's python goes up along the top end, with the spotted python along the coast, and then this putative species here up in the northern Cape York area. So we'll start out with the original ant, the children's python. This was again described in 1842, so we've known about it for a while. Across the top end of Northern Territory and into Western Australia. Might even get down into Queensland a little bit as well. And this one's closely related to Stimson's python. Another name is the faded python. They start out life hatching out as a boldly patterned hatchling, and then as they get older they kind of fade and lose a lot of that patterning. You can still see some adults that have a pretty robust and bold pattern, but a lot of them kind of have that faded outlook, so kind of an interesting look. And they may do a little color change from day to night, so sometimes you'll go in and the pattern will be popping out a little more and their background color is kind of lighter, so kind of an interesting little day to night shift in pattern and color sometimes. Here's some habitat shot from the Kakadu area. So they're found in kind of those woodlands, dry sclerophyll forests and other areas, and usually associated with rocky outcrops or other artificial color. They'll also make use of tree hollows, termite mounds, that kind of thing, and they use caves as well. There's an interesting population of children's pythons up in the escarpment country of the Arnhem Land. They live on the rocks, so they're pretty much saxicolous. They're really kind of different. It's kind of strange because you can find normal, run-of-the-mill children's pythons down in the valleys, but then you get up in the rocks and you find these kind of weirder variants. And they're long and thin. They have a really narrow head, and there's a little bit of confusion sometimes when herpers find one of these large escarpment children's pythons. They think they found an Owen Pelly python, so they get really excited because Owen Pelly's like the holy grail over there. They're really hard to find. And I have a friend that calls them drop bears. He won't even call them Owen Pelly pythons because he thinks he's going to jinx himself. And he actually found some, so now he can call them Owen Pellys, I guess. But he found one in this rusted out car that was out in the middle of the outback, and saw kind of the pattern and the colors, and he's like, I found my Owen Pelly python, and then it turned out to be a children's python, so he's a little disappointed. But still kind of, they're a cool snake in their own regard, but as I mentioned, they'll utilize cave systems and they'll hunt bats, and this is probably a common thing for a lot of different species throughout the world. Bats are, they're plentiful in a lot of areas. They come out of the caves by the thousands, and so they'll sit up and kind of wedge themselves in among the rocks and then strike at a passing bat, and once in a while they'll catch one, and so it's kind of cool behavior. I think there's some nice documentary footage out there. You can see of these guys catching bats. We found this road-killed children's python up in the Northern Territory, and it had a big food bolus, so we thought, what's in there, So let's squeeze it out and see. It was kind of disgusting. I think Rico did the squeezing. He kind of gave us a hard time. We were in the process of writing the book on Antaresia, and he's like writing all these notes. He's like, where's your notepad? I'm like, oh, yeah, it's in my bag. Like, why aren't you taking notes? You guys are idiots. Come on. I'll share my notes with you. But so we recorded this little mammal in this individual, some kind of rat species. I don't know my mammals of Australia very well, so but I think we got it down to the genus of mammal or something in the book. But so they start out life typically, and this is common with all Antaresia, they'll start out eating lizards, small geckos and things, and as they get larger, they'll start taking on mammalian diet, and this is common with a lot of the carpet complex as well. There's even been records of them feeding on some smaller varanids, and we found some really cool. That was another fun story. Rico found a tail sticking out of a hole, so he started pulling on it. It turned out to be a yellow-necked monitor breachy, however you pronounce that, but it was kind of fun to find that. All right, we'll go into the spotted python. These guys are along the eastern coast of Australia, and they're the largest Antaresia. They're the ones that get about 4 feet at maximum length. So similar woodland habitats and rocky outcrops. They're kind of fine through semi-tropical areas. When we were in the Iron Range, the trip Alan was talking about, there was, we were going through the rainforest looking for green trees and things like that, but we found a couple spotted pythons in the Iron Range area, but they were always kind of on the outskirts of the rainforest. We never found them in the rainforest, and so there was another little dirty trick Alan played on us. They stopped the car and they're snakes. So we all jump out of the car because we were in the lead car. He's like, you missed a snake. And so we stop and get out of the car, and then they pass us because they wanted to be in the front car instead of the one following us. So yeah, I learned a lot of good tricks from Alan here. So there's also populations on offshore islands, kind of interesting things. And as mentioned before, they occur up in New Guinea. There's some kind of pattern variation across the range. Up in the north, you tend to see the individuals like on the right. That's the one we found up in the Cape York Peninsula. Kind of have larger blotches, a little more faded out pattern, where in the south, this is maybe not the best individual. On the left, that's actually an island population, but in the south, they have kind of a more smaller spots, more raggedy looking spots, and darker, kind of bolder coloration. So, and there's kind of a shift as you move upward to see kind of that more bold, blotchy form. Although when you get up into New Guinea, they kind of go back to that southern look, so they have really almost like a granite spotted python. It's kind of interesting. So like the children's pythons, they'll go through a little bit of an ontogenic change as they hatch with a kind of a more bold pattern. As they get older, the base pattern kind of lightens out. It gets more yellowy and stuff, and then the pattern kind of sticks out a little bit more. They're a little less boldly patterned as hatchlings as they are compared when they're adults. And this little bit questions of species and things, thinking about the carpet complex that Nick was talking about yesterday. Is it a habitat preference? There's a lot of talk whether jungle carpets are just a regional variant of coastal carpets because they live in the jungle and it's more advantageous to be a black and yellow. That helps you hide in the jungle, whereas on the kind of the drier forest areas, you're more tan earth colors to blend in there. So I don't know. You wonder if you take a bunch of tan coastals and put them in the jungle, come back 20 years later if they're going to be black and yellow. So maybe a similar thing with these guys. here's an example of some hatchlings on eggs, and then the adult kind of look. So as I mentioned, Mark O'Shea discovered some spotted pythons. He was waiting for a plane, so he decided just to herp around this airstrip, typical herper, right? Make do where you can. And he found this spotted python out in the middle of the airfield, and he's like, what is this doing here? You know, did somebody drop it out of a plane? So after more search in close by areas, including Soda and Weem, they found more individuals, so there appears to be a population. This is a fairly dangerous area, so people don't just go up there to herp because they might lose their life, and so it's a little harder to, I guess, study this population, and I don't know if any work's ongoing, and funding's always a fun issue as well. But so this goes along with that disjunct populations that Nick was talking about with the carpet pythons, where you've got them at land bridge and all that good stuff. These guys will also take bats, as with the children's python. Here's one that actually caught a bat. This is taken by Michael Cermak up in Cape York area. And again, as juveniles, they'll feed on lizards. They'll move into mammals, but they also eat reptiles as adults. There was a paper on ophiophagy. So somebody found a wild spotted python that had a big lump, and they were handling it, and it regurgitated, and it was a keelback snake. And they looked at the keelback snake, and it had a lump. So they looked inside that, and there were 2 cane toads inside the keelback. So indirect feeding on cane toads, but kind of an interesting little paper. That was a little nugget of science. And once in a while, they'll include a bird in their diet, but they're a little harder to catch, so you don't see that too often. The pygmy python is the smallest python in the world. Their scientific name, Antaresia perthensis, is a misnomer. They don't occur anywhere near Perth. Perth is down here in the south of Western Australia, and they're way up there. So probably a similar thing to the Timor python, where somebody sent in a specimen clear back in the day. It flew out of Perth, and so they went, oh, they're from Perth, so we'll name them perthensis. So that's kind of an interesting misnaming of the smallest python in the world. They're completely endemic to Western Australia, and they're overlap their range with the Western Stimson's python. And these are highly desert adapted. They're found in the Pilbara. You got to say it like an Australian. I get made fun of by my friends over there saying Pilbara. So Pilbara in Western Australia. That's one of the greatest places on earth. If you have a chance, go up to Pilbara and check out that area. It's beautiful. They have kind of a nice range of colors and patterns, but they tend to have really small spots, if any at all. Some can have that really nice red look, and there's a little bit of regional variation throughout the range, but for the most part, they're kind of nice reddish to match those beautiful red rocks out there. And this isn't the road, this is the soil out there. It's just rocky soil, and it just looks like somebody just dumped out a bag of gravel, nice red rock. So kind of a cool look out there. They're also known as the anthill python because they're commonly found inside termite mounds. And these are really great places, especially out in a harsh desert like the Pilbara, because it has a stable temperature inside. It's 70s, mid-70s, into the low 80s. And the termites actually do different things to regulate the temperature to keep it at that comfortable temperature for their eggs and developing little termites. And this also gives them a nice humid area and kind of protection for predators. The termite mounds are really solid and almost like concrete. And then little geckos will also get in there to eat the termites, and so they have a steady supply of food that come in there. So, and there's just these huge, impressive termite mounds throughout Australia. So a lot of the Antaresia will make use of this as well. This is an interesting observation of a pygmy python feeding on roadkill. I guess Lawrence, Mr. Lawrence, I can't remember his first name, but he took a picture of this guy, kind of peeled it off of the pavement. It was plastered down on the pavement, peeled it up and ate it, in front of him. So that's kind of a cool thing. But they typically feed on lizards for the majority of their life, and there's no end to lizards out there. There's so many different species, so it's a great place to go if you like geckos and dragons and skinks. Older individuals will usually include some rodents in their diet as well, where they can find them. So the Stimsoni, as I mentioned, is divided into 2 different species. The Western Stimson's python is endemic to Western Australia, And Brian Bush, I asked him, he's an avid herper over there, he gets out a lot, and I asked him where he sees the dividing between the eastern and western. He said it was around the Canning Stock route, which is up kind of just along this line here, it kind of goes down. So he said around there is where he sees nothing, so western Stimson's pythons, then nothing for a while, and then he starts to see the eastern Stimsons as well. So it kind of inhabits a diverse range of habitats across Western Australia, up and down Western Australia for the most part, and they're very commonly found over there. And they have a really nice variety of colors and patterns. Who needs a morph when you got the regular Stimson's pythons looking like this? They're just beautiful animals. So they're one of my favorites to keep and breed. So I got out into the wheat belt, and as you can see kind of from this inset, the wheat belt covers a very vast range across Australia, and when you're driving through it, it's just field after field of wheat. You kind of get sick of it. And it's really modified the habitat, of course, and so it's displaced a lot of native flora and fauna. Some endangered species have been kind of pushed out by this agriculture, and this is common also on the east coast as well. But there's these giant granite outcrops, and you can't really plow over those and plant wheat on them, so they're like islands of natural habitat for wildlife. And so I had a friend that took us out to the wheat belt and these granite outcrops. And my wife I went on this trip with my wife because she didn't want me to go alone. She was worried about me herping Australia alone, so she was going to go to protect me or whatever. And I had contacted my friend. He's like, yeah, I'll take you out and we'll look for these things. And so he gets out of his car and he opens his trunk and he pulls out this big crowbar. And my wife's like, oh no, he's going to murder us. I'm like, yeah. It's okay, he's legit, we're going to be all right. And so he used it to kind of lift up these rocks to look underneath them, because there's these big kind of capstones. Now my friend was very responsible. We'd lift them up, look, and then we'd place them back and kind of fill the dirt in around them. But as we walked in, especially the places closest to the road, it was just scar after scar of these flipped capstones. It's like really heartbreaking, because it's all this primary habitat, not just for Stimson's pythons, but for any wildlife out there, that lives under a rock. Centipedes are really cool, blue centipedes and things, and all sorts of lizards and geckos, or a bunch of different lizard species live under these capstones. So it was really hard to see that by unscrupulous collectors. And I'm hoping, with the rising generation like Matthias and his brother, and hopefully they're learning the ropes from, responsible, I'm sure they are, but others like them, hopefully they're learning that responsibility. And when we take out other people, we show them how to do it right. I had the opportunity to go with some university students down to St. George and got to give them the lecture of, hey, when you flip a rock, flip it back, make sure it's the way you found it or better, and so we need to make sure people are responsible. When we were getting the book ready, we looked at all the different scale counts that have been published, and I thought this was a really kind of an interesting thing, and I wonder how this came to be, because you've got children's pythons on the left, the western Stimsons in the middle, and the eastern Stimsons on the right. And if you'll notice, the scale count kind of just, these are the averages. And if you'll see the western Stimson's pythons have generally the higher scale counts. And you'll find that children's python kind of fall between the western and the eastern Stimson's pythons. So it looks like the eastern and the westerns are more similar to children's pythons than they are each other. So is this a suggestion that maybe there's some cryptic speciation going on here? Or maybe the eastern and western Stimson's pythons are in fact different species. And so more work needs to be done there. So the eastern Stimson's python has a really broad range, and of course there's a good possibility that there's other things going on with this group as well, as far as taxonomic revision in the future. These are the most widespread of the Antaresia, and they also have the common name of large blotched python. And here's a little bit of variation throughout the range. These are Central Australian specimens. Really, they're probably one of the prettier Orientalis, eastern Stimsons. Render Springs is kind of up in the northern territory, so getting close to the children's python overlap, and so they look a little more children's python-y. Windor is in Queensland, kind of in the north of Queensland, and then you've got Sturt National Park down in New South Wales. So very different appearance, and the Charleville and Sturt, these kind of represent what a lot of herpetoculturalists in Europe are calling the Saxicola subspecies. They're kind of saying this is a third subspecies of eastern, and they call them Saxicola sometimes. This individual was found in central Australia hanging out in a tree. I'm not sure what he was waiting for. There's a lot of arboreal geckos out there, so maybe he's looking for a little Ciliaris or something to grab, but maybe a bird or even a bat, who knows. But kind of interesting observation. So they can go up in the trees and utilize tree hollows and such. They've been known to they've been recorded feeding on small varanids like Varandus acantharus, and in the spring, they make really good use, when the rains come, of different frog species. So they've been observed eating a lot of frogs in the canyons when the rains come. So they make good use of those food items. So with, you looked at the scale count, you can tell me which one's east and west, right? You can count those L'Oreal scales. They were really high counts in the west. Okay, so the one on the left is the western Stimson's pythons. They tend to have a little more darker color on the head. The patterns usually stand out a little bolder, whereas the easterns kind of fade a little bit more between the background and the foreground color, and then they have more lighter colored heads. All right, this one was kind of fun. So I was at my friend Peter Birch's house, and we were looking through his collection, and he had these things, they call them Pygmy Stimson's pythons over there, and they just thought they were some little variant of Stimson's python. And I was looking at it, and I'm like, that looks like no Stimson's python I've ever seen. It's really different looking. Their head morphology and their patterns and everything just didn't look like a Stimson's at all. And I said, I think this is something different. This is different. And he said, yeah, I've got a friend that kind of thinks the same way. And so we made this plan. All right, let's publish this. Let's get some data, maybe do some PCR. I've got a friend that can do it. I write publications for a living, so I know how to write a paper. And so we were all excited, and I went home, and I'm like, okay, let's do this. And he's like, actually, we're going to go ahead without you. My buddy doesn't want to involve an American in this. And I'm like, great, okay, no worries. So we put it in the book, and we gave it our own name. We called it Pygmy Banded Python. And so there's different justifications for this, including the morphology, scale counts, and there's some interesting natural history differences, as well as anytime you have a sympatric distribution or an overlapping distribution with another closely related species in the same genus, that typically indicates speciation in a lot of cases, and so they have different natural history, so they don't compete with each other, which is an interesting phenomenon found in a wide range of species. But obviously there's genetic work that's needed on this group, and they ended up sending in a paper, and actually one of the reviewers or editors of the paper contacted me. He's like, "What is this paper? It's terrible." I'm like, "Okay." I told them I'd help them, but they didn't want my help, so I'm not going to say anything about it. So here's the scale counts. So they're thought to be a Stimson's python, but here's our eastern Stimson's pythons over on the right that are the closest geographically to these things, and then our Pygmy banded pythons, the putative species, on the left, and then maculosa, the large Antaresia that overlaps with these Pygmy banded pythons. And here again, so we've got the Pygmy banded pythons. They typically have the lower numbers of the averages, and your Stimson's pythons have the higher averages, and then you got maculosa with counts in the middle. So the Pygmy banded pythons have more similar counts. You have more similarity to the spotted pythons, so I'm surprised they didn't call them Pygmy spotted pythons. But anyway, so that points to something else going on here, that they're not Stimson's pythons as was thought, and they most likely could be a new species that needs to be described. So they're often found near trees, and of course, trees are along water courses, so you'll find them along water courses, and they generally feed on geckos, small lizards, frogs, and They're very much smaller than the spotted pythons, and so that's why we call them pygmy pythons. They're about the same size as a pygmy python almost, so they're really quite small. Their range, we kind of have a fairly good idea about it, but not for sure. They have a really pretty pattern, especially in some of these individuals like the one on the left, that zebra kind of black and white pattern, really pretty. This is the one on the right is one we found in the area of Georgetown, and we had some intel that they could be found here, and so I took my 3 oldest kids and we went and we're looking for them out there and walking around this dam, and they're kind of nervous, you know, we're out walking around. Usually we were road cruising, so that's kind of the lazy man's way to find it, but it's always fun when you walk on something and, you know, on foot, and so that's how we found this guy on the right, so that was kind of a fun find. But there were frogs everywhere, lots of different species, so it was kind of a cool habitat to see all these different frog species. So I imagine frogs probably play a pretty good role. There are also a lot of cane toads. For some reason, like, they were all half dead. It was really weird. I don't know what was going on there. Maybe they found some control measures that they were implementing there. Kind of cool. So we'll talk a little bit about the husbandry of this group. So, you know, why do you want to keep Antaresia? The pros, they're really an interesting snake, and they come in a small package. They have a range of appearances, as you can see from these wild types, and they're fairly easy to keep and breed. Some species may be a little more difficult, or subspecies, but they're also tolerant of diverse conditions. So they come from pretty harsh areas that get really hot in the summer and really cold in the winter. So, you know, they can tolerate some keeper air, I guess you'd call it. And they require quite a little bit less space than compared with other pythons, especially like a retic or something. You can get, you know, 50 Antaresia in the same spot as a room-sized cage for a retic. The downside is their hatchlings can be a little tricky to get started on food. Some species are a little food happy, so they strike a little bit more often than others. And if you're the kind of guy that likes to walk around without your shirt on with a giant snake around your neck, this is probably not the group for you. Some are a little more difficult to find in the U.S. They're a little more rare. So, and then did I mention the hatchlings can be a pain in the neck? I've had many a hatchling in my hand just going, would you just eat? But yeah, you got to keep your patience, I guess. So they kept in a wide range of setups. With their small size, they can be adapted to the rack system, but the more naturalistic cages, you know, can be visually stimulating for us, as well as kind of enriching for the snakes. And so, you know, you can set them up various ways. Fairly easy to breed. I routinely produce all 4 species, and the Pygmy Pythons reproduce under 100 grams, so they're fairly small. They're designed to be small, I guess, and they fit in that niche. So they just require a bit of a cooling period, and they breed during that period, and then eggs in the spring to summer. They'll lay an average of 8 to 14 eggs, so they don't have very, you know, too huge a clutch size, and clutches over 20 eggs are pretty rare, and they hatch around 50 days. And I've hatched them using maternal or artificial incubation. I caught a Stimson's python as she was laying, so I put a little temperature recorder in with the eggs, and so she curled around it like it was one of the eggs, and so it was in the middle of the coils and recorded the temperatures during incubation. And the calibration may have been off. I thought I did that right, but it looks like they got pretty hot in there, up into the 90s, 92, 93 degrees at some point. So obviously cyclic as the day and night. But so maybe they incubate their temperatures a little warmer than we initially thought. Females will sometimes leave to bask or even to eat. I've fed females that are incubating eggs, and they'll eat while they're wrapped around their eggs. It's kind of funny. Artificial incubation, you can set up the eggs many different ways. I use vermiculite and perlite, but I've also used the no substrate method with a light diffuser over water, and found that if you have a larger nest box, it's a little more stable, and the incubation goes a little better that way. That's a Western Stimson's python that laid a week or 2 ago. Starting hatchlings can be a little tricky, but there's obviously some different techniques to use. If anybody's bred colubrids, they're fairly similar in that regard. But as I found that with successive generations, they get a little easier to start. I mean, obviously, Western hognoses, some will start out on a pinky right away, because they're multiple generation captive bred fed on rodents, whereas you take one, a wild caught animal would never do that. They want a toad. So I guess we're maybe moving towards domestication almost in some of these species, and so they become a little more easy to get started. But various routines you can use. My favorite new one I found, or it was a suggestion from a Kluber breeder. He said, have you tried boiling the pinkies? So you take a frozen thawed pinky and put it in a thing of boiling water, and then I had like 15 out of 17 that just went right on that, and they refused food for months. So I was really happy with that little tip. But sometimes they'll require to be started out using assist feeding, but usually if you can get the food item in their mouth, they'll usually take it down from there, so it doesn't require a lot. So of course I can't cover everything in a 40-minute talk, and there's a nice book that somebody wrote and that's out. If you want to learn more about Antaresia, here's the place. And it hasn't sold out yet, so we've got copies, and I brought one for the raffle, so you can check that out. But Bob Ashley published this one as well as the Carpet Python book, and so hopefully it's a pretty good summary of what's known about these guys. And we've tried to make it the biggest collection of photographs of wild specimens, so you can see the diversity of their appearance throughout their range. So, most books that talk about them have like one picture and then a brief discussion of their natural history, but we have like a full chapter and pages of pictures and information that we've been able to glean. So to kind of summarize, 6 species, subspecies, putative species in this group, and maybe more. They have amazing natural history traits and really fascinating species, a wide range of natural appearances, so you don't need any morphs. They're beautiful in their own right. They're relatively easy to keep and breed, although some may be a little more difficult than others, but hatchlings are kind of a pain. But once they're established, they're pretty solid. Like Nick was saying, it would take a stick of dynamite to kill one of these guys once they get started eating rodents, so they're really fun to keep. So yeah, and thank my wife for letting me come and go herping and visit with you fine folks. Nick, co-author, and Peter Birch on the book. Trent was the one that took me out herping in the wheat belt, as well as Jason Boys, who took us up to the Iron Range and some other trips. My former business partners, Ben and Steve, and then my Australian friends, Troy and Joy Kuligowski, Deb Larks, and David Fisher, who helped me out a lot with the book as well. So, any questions?
All right, what do you guys think about that? Leave a comment down below. Justin, great job, man. It was great talking to you as well. Good dude over there. There's a link down in the description for Herpeton. You want to attend the next one coming up next year, and there's going to be a lot of more good speakers coming up. Next week we're going to be talking with Mark Mandick over at Marcus Jane Ball Pythons up in Canada. And until then, you've been watching Triple B TV. Y'all take care. All right, Justin, really good job, man. It was great talking to you there as well. And the link down for the next Herpeton is down there in the description. Good job, Justin. Hey, it was great talking to you there as well, man. That was a lot of good dude over there. There's a link down in the description if you want to return the next Herp. Oh my gosh! Shut up, Cricket. My mama told me you better shop around, shop around, shop around, yeah. Mike sounds good. How's it going, folks? Brian Cusco here at Triple B TV. Oh no, that's not what you say. Cricket.